Alhamdulillah, 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 Rabbil Alameen. Uh, we give thanks and adoration to the Almighty Allah, who has made it possible for us to all come together here today. We pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would continue to increase us in knowledge and understanding. We pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to steadfast our path on the path of Islam. Indeed, it is guidance only come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guided, no one can lead astray. And whosoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not provided guidance with or has led astray, no one can lead that person to the path of guidance. We testify to the fact that the Prophet Muhammad and the peace and the blessings of the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to be upon him, his family, his household, and the companions who spend time with him. And also those of us who continue to follow on the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala count us amongst those that will be successful in this life, in the grave, and on the day of resurrection. Ameen.
Ameen.
As we always like to say, we are all seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by engaging in activities like this, we are trying our possible best to see how we could attain that ultimate success, because indeed the ultimate success is in following the Quran, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to the whole of mankind, and also in following in the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad and all the prophets who came before him as well, because as Muslims, we do not make any distinction between these prophets. Now, it is out of this that we've selected this topic for discussion today, and basically it is Bidayah Al-Hidayah, which simply translates to the beginning of guidance. This is based on the works of Imam Al-Ghazali. Many of us know him as Imam Al-Ghazali, but in reality, what is his full name? His full name is, we tend to, his actual name is Abu Hamid Muhammad. And actually, that Ghazali itself is more like a title, which I believe he would have inherited from his maybe father or great grandfather, basically because of kind of trade they were involved in, which is essentially weaving. So they were essentially a family of weavers. So they actually weave things and everything. So basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has made him someone who had the opportunity to study Islam, who has gone into several aspects of the deen. But of course, one of the things he's well known for is more along his philosophy. And again, which at times I consider it to be a shame, because quite frankly, he's contributed more to the practice and the understanding of the deen than just the philosophy, because the philosophy aspect is more along the academic line. And of course, again, unfortunately, the aspect of the philosophy has been one of the main sources of criticism by some group of Muslims. But having said that, we start with Bidayah Al-Hidayah. Now, Bidayah Al-Hidayah is one of his very well-known books, but compared to his most famous book, which is Ihya Ulumuddin, which translates to the revival of the religious sciences. Now, this is very broad. It's a very comprehensive book. That's Ihya Ulumuddin, and for those who are interested in it, I believe you can always get a copy. It's nice to read. It's enjoyable to read. Very easy, very straightforward. But of course, you do have to stop from time to time to kind of like reflect on some of the things you've read, to kind of gain an understanding of what message is trying to pass across. And at times, it might be difficult for people to read at times. And I'm giving both sides now, because in his writing of the book, there are some assumptions that you might need to consider. So in other words, if you don't have certain basic knowledge, certain basic understanding, one might find it difficult to be able to follow this book correctly. That's Ihya Ulumuddin. So I haven't even gone into Bidayah, Al-Hidayah itself. For those who are, again, interested in it, I believe there are a number of, I think Sheikh Dr. Yahya Rodos, who is a scholar who is based, I believe, in Spain. He did several hours of lectures, discussion on just purely Ihya Ulumuddin. I think that's been about maybe 10 or 20 hours. For those who may have the time to actually sit down and listen through, such very lengthy lectures. And I think Dr. Abdul Hakim Murad, who is, the founder of CMC, which is the Cambridge Muslim College, also, did a number of series on Imam Al-Ghazali as well, focusing on leadership from the perspective of how, Imam Al-Ghazali was seen at the time, and also comparing it with current practices of today as well. Now, to formally talk more about Imam Al-Ghazali himself, he was born around 450 after Hijrah, and he died 505, which essentially tells us that he died very young. In fact, quite frankly, many of us, well, I won't say many of us, but some of us currently listening are probably, attained much older age than he is. And, as at the time he died, and we continue to, look at some of these things to sort of ask ourselves, what sort of contribution are we making, with the plenty of time that we've had, with longer lifespan that some of us are experiencing. He had a very short, I would say, but pretty short, by even standards of the day at the time, to die very young, or middle age, so to speak. But during the period, he did a lot of work. Some of his books have never been found, but even the few that we have around, they continue to inspire people, both in the West and in the East. Those in the West are usually more interested in his philosophical views, and how he approached certain topics from purely philosophy. Then, of course, for those who are mainly Sufis, they also, again, want to, take ownership of him. But at the same time, people who are, more practical oriented in terms of, how do we bridge that gap between those who are big scholars and those who are ignorant? Because, and again, these are some of the ways he tried to approach the topics of religion, in the sense that I think right now in our current age, we do have the absence, or call it the absence, or the tragedy of the missing Muslim middle class. When I say middle class, I mean people who you would say are not scholars, so to speak, pure scholars who have gone into study, Quranic sciences or the science of Hadith. So you have that category sitting down somewhere. Then you now have the category of the very ignorant Muslims who one might describe as purely nominal, essentially just following whatever they see. They pray when people pray, they fast when people fast, they go to Hajj when they hear people are going for Hajj. But when it comes to the in-between, and I think that's what I'm talking about, the middle class, the in-between, people who essentially are not scholars, so to speak, but are people who, don't fall into that lower end, but people in the middle. And, that middle itself is getting smaller by the day, in the sense that people are afraid to, to get into that that field of trying to understand oneself and trying to understand how best to practice the thing itself. And I think that's one of the things he tried to accomplish. And that's one of the reasons why I sort of enjoy reading some of his books, because what he does is that he doesn't just provide you with the facts of what you need to know. It would also tell you how you need to know it. And I think this is how he has approached Bidayah Al-Hidayah. And the reason why he approached it this way was, again, we need to understand why he wrote it. Now, it was written as a reply to one of his students who asked for a short essay on spiritual knowledge. So someone approached and said, look, Sheikh or doctor, please, how, tell me how. So how do I attain that level? We know what that level is, but the question is, how do I go about attaining that level? And that's why if you read it, the book itself looks very prescriptive, sort of detailed to a certain extent, but in fact, in practical times, I think we may even struggle to be able to achieve all the things is listed, and it's quite heavy. But again, at the same time, it's sort of a general guidance, which people need to look into and see how best we could. Again, I think I said earlier that, who was he? I think I must have joined. He mastered all the Islamic sciences as well as the secular sciences of the day, linguistics, philosophy, logic, all those things. There were things he mastered, and he wrote lots of books on them. He memorized 12,000 pages of fiqh text, wrote influential books, read throughout the Muslim world, and was responding to those who attacked Islam at the time as well. He was given the highest position of in Darul Hikmah in Baghdad, which incidentally was actually one of the places he had studied as well. He was given one of the highest level there, and it was like a celebrity at the time. He was known throughout the Muslim world for his extraordinary knowledge. Again, considering his age at the time, he was pretty young when he was given that, that the highest position, or position of a professor, or even emeritus professor at the time. But again, it got to a point in his life where he experienced that inner crisis of practice, inner crisis of everything around you. And the good thing for him at the time, which I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assist those of us listening and many of us in this generation in trying to identify, is, many of us are in crisis, but we fail to recognize the crisis of our day, the crisis of our time. We currently live in a world where there is so much confusion, there's so much challenges, particularly for those growing up now. And at times I do feel sorry for them, because, when I do look at, me growing up, there are some things that by design, you don't have access to. You don't have access to those things. But right now, growing up now, and even for adults as well, some of the things that we could easily avoid physically, some of those things are actually coming into our homes right now. So essentially, there's crisis of faith, there's crisis of practice of the deen, and there's also crisis of how we could even advance the deen of Al-Islam itself. It's very easy to make 5-10 minutes YouTube video clip for people to watch, but people hardly sit down to actually read these days anymore. Reading used to be one of the main major means of transmitting knowledge, but now people just sit down, think it's very easy, or assume it's very easy, listen to a 5-10 minutes video clip, and they assume they already know. And I think these are some of the things, so these are some of the crises. So I'm trying to kind of connect what he described as crisis at its time to what we would term as crisis of our time. So these crises exist, but unfortunately for us, we do not recognize this crisis in our time. We pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to be able to, deal with whatever crises that exist in our time today. Now, most famous of his work is the Ihya Ulumuddin, which is the revival of the religious sciences. Again, I think it's a very popular book. Now, the main point of Ihya Ulumuddin is that it has a heavy focus on facts, on information, and it's to some extent very academic in its approach. But again, you still have to sit down and do a lot of deep reflection to kind of understand what sort of angle is approaching the topic from. Before I proceed to talk more about, to specifically delve into Bidayah Al-Hidayah, again, I think I must mention at this junction that despite its popularity and its well-known status in the Muslim world, as you can imagine, there will always be those who, consider him to be controversial in some of his views. There are still those who are always very happy to attack some of his works, some of his old writings, particularly from the angle of philosophy. People continue to argue, or people even continue to even make takfirs upon him. And again, the simple answer to those people is, quite frankly, what is achieved as a Muslim, what it has achieved, in transmitting Islam. Many of the people who try to score very cheap points by attacking some of his work would have never written anything. Some of them have never written anything in their life. What they've always done is just to follow whoever they are following. And unfortunately, some of them do just follow blindly without even understanding the criticism which has been leveled against him. And those who are very well read, who have pure understanding of the deen, who have provided those criticism, they understand the criticism, they go as far as criticizing, which again is purely academic, because from an academic standpoint, professors criticize themselves. You read somebody's work, you critique it, you say what you don't like about it, you say what you disagree about it. And that doesn't mean that you see that person they follow you, you're not going to hug them. Some of those things were purely academic, but unfortunately, for people with little understanding, they just pick on this point and make it a basis of saying that, look, we shouldn't listen to XYZ, we shouldn't read from XYZ simply because they said something they didn't agree with, or because they found a weak hadith or an hadith that was fabricated in the collection of some of the work. So again, that is just a point for me to just mention. Now, going to the topic itself, the beginning of guidance. Now, I'm going to start with one of his quotations where he said, "You should know before all else that guidance, which is a fruit of knowledge, has a beginning, an end, and an outward aspect and an inward essence." So in other words, he's saying that, look, whatever you consider knowledge to be, okay, I mean, recognizing the fact that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a full embodiment of knowledge, you should always know that guidance is actually a fruit of knowledge. So that's where it begins from. So guidance starts from knowledge, but at the same time, it has a beginning and an end, an outward aspect and an inward essence. Now, I'm going to talk more about that outward aspect and an inward essence, because in his own perspective, he believes that as a Muslim, for you to actually achieve that ultimate success itself, you need to start from that outward aspect. Which again, initially I find a bit, oftentimes people talk about, making sure the Iman sits in your heart, and once the Iman or taqwa is in your heart, it becomes a lot easier for you to be able to practice all those other aspects of the thing. But in his own explanation or one of his own rationale for actually saying the outward aspect is key is because oftentimes, particularly in an environment where we find it's very easy for you to get away with saying, I believe in the world we live in today. Okay, you can say I believe in my heart. But when it comes to that outward aspect, and that is where a lot of us tend to struggle today. Okay, somebody might struggle because of peer pressure, because of that outward. They believe what they say is wrong, or what's in the environment is wrong, but because of that outward aspect, the difficulty of practicing that outward aspect, people get lost. And I think this is really important, because you begin to see the reason why is approached the topic from this angle, saying that outward aspect that you think is not important is actually the core importance of the whole practice of the thing itself. You can't say you believe in Salat and not practice Salat. You have to practice Salat, people will see it. You have to pray Salat, people will see it. It's not just a question of I believe in Salat and not pray. You can't say I believe in fasting and not fast. You cannot say I believe in doing good deeds and not practice them. It is actually in the practice of the good deeds or good actions that actually confirms that inward essence that you have. And I think that is one of the things you actually read and you begin to sit down. Okay, what is it trying to talk about? You sit down, you wait for a few minutes, try to digest, try to understand why he has approached it in that manner. Now, he also says that no way to reach the end without mastering the beginning. So whatever you do, and I always say this to myself as well, oftentimes, when you want to do something, when you want to achieve something in life, many of us struggle. And oftentimes, the beginning is usually the most difficult aspect of whatever you want to do. Ask anyone, those writing a storybook, or who are writing a journal or something, or who are writing or trying to publish an article. Oftentimes, the beginning is usually the most difficult. And I think that is why mastering, understanding the beginning is quite key. Because without understanding the beginning, you will not be able to reach the end. Another point he makes is that no way to discover inner essence until you have arrived at an understanding of its outward. And I think I said that at the beginning, that look, there's no way that you can discover that inner essence until you have arrived at an understanding of its outward. So that outward aspect, which we talked about, you will not be able to achieve that inward essence without arriving at that outward essence itself. So if you say you actually believe, the only way you know you actually believe is when you actually have that outward aspect of it. You can say you believe in yourself, you believe, you think you believe, but in reality, the only way you actually know that you have arrived is when you've arrived at an understanding of that outward itself. Now, in his part of his introduction, he emphasized one point, and I think he also emphasized he had a whole chapter of a whole section of Al-Hidayah talking about knowledge itself. So in that section, he talked about knowledge of how to acquire knowledge. The importance, if I started by talking about the importance of knowledge, how to acquire knowledge, what are the characteristics of knowledge, the type of knowledge, and it goes on, talks about knowledge, your responsibility as a student of knowledge, what things you need to do, how to humble yourself as a student of knowledge. So it goes on to talk a lot about that. But in this section here, as I said, Bidayah, Al-Hidayah is purely, how. Okay, so if Hiya Ulumuddin is what, Bidayah Al-Hidayah is how. Okay, so and in this how, it talks about he who increases in knowledge but no guidance increases only in distance from Allah Most High. And I think in that same section, he then talked about the dua, which is essentially, oh Allah, I seek refuge from you, from knowledge, which does not benefit, and the heart that is not submissive to you or fearful to you, from the soul that does not feel contented, and the supplication that is not answered. And I think this is a very common dua, and I think it's also very important for us to always have this at the back of our mind. Allahumma inni a'udhuka min ilmin la yanfa'u, which is essentially, oh Allah, I seek refuge. I seek refuge from knowledge which does not benefit. Quite frankly, people get involved with a lot of things these days, knowledge which does not benefit them. In fact, at times, knowledge could become very difficult for us. And I'll give an example, which was given by one of the local imams recently. He said that, and I think many of us will be able to relate to this as well. Now, when we're growing up, when we're at home, there's a song that we always sing that, if you don't pray Tarawih, okay, if you don't pray Tarawih, your fasting is not accepted, or fasting is pointless. So many of us then, even those who used to pray 5 days Salat regularly, they take Tarawih seriously because they know they don't want that fast to go to waste. Then we now head, so we at the back of your mind, Tarawih is compulsory, it is mandatory. Okay. Then you get to university and they tell you, oh, by the way, Tarawih is not mandatory. You say, hey, but like the first time, and you see it a lot in the 100 level students, first time university, or when some of them are just getting to know that Tarawih is not mandatory, they are the people you find missing in Tarawih. Or they come in, they just pray 2 rakah and go. Someone who used to pray 10, 20 before, now knowledge, okay, now that they've come to learn that it is not mandatory, all of a sudden they stop doing it. So again, that is why at times that prayer is very crucial to say, oh Allah, I seek refuge from knowledge which does not benefit. So knowledge, in other words, as you're seeking benefit from knowledge which does not benefit, you're also asking Allah to make whatever you learn be of benefit to you. And I think that's the counterpoint to this again, that on one hand, yes, you want to avoid knowledge that does not benefit you, but at the same time, you want things that you learn to be of benefit to you. And I think that's another important prayer for every single of us that we need to engage in as best as we can. Now, and this is a very common thing in how certain topics are approached. The whole topic itself, the whole approach to the whole discussion itself is divided into 3 sections. So the first section talks about obedience. Okay. Now, in talking about obedience is talking a lot about how you deal with your everyday life. So essentially, it talks about how you approach your morning, what you do during the day. Essentially, 24-hour set of rules that you need to achieve on for you to consider yourself an obedient servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Refraining from disobedience. Again, that is second section of the book itself. And the final section talks about the etiquette of companionship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So very simple, straight points at the back of the mind. So this is somebody, remember, is talking to someone who has come for advice. He said, look, please advise me. How do I achieve the ultimate status in terms of spiritual knowledge? And again, say, look, number 1, obedience. Number 2, refrain from disobedience. And number 3, the etiquette of companionship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, obedience, not talking about those people who have decided to, particularly for those who are familiar with topic politics, so to speak. Some people have classified themselves as the obedience, but again, it's just for us to keep at the back of our mind that the obedience that we want to really focus on essentially is obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in its tackling the topic itself, it begins again focusing on certain key concepts. Okay, and part of his key concept is that religion is made up of 2 parts. Religion is made up of 2 parts. One of them is refraining from disobedience, and the other is performing acts of obedience. So overall, when you look at religion as a whole, there are 2 basic fundamentals. Number 1, refraining from disobedience, and the other part is performing acts of obedience. Now, the first is more important and more serious. And it quotes one of the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, Prophet ﷺ says, the true immigrant is the one who abandons evil, and the true warrior is the one who fights his passion. So for us to be truly, truly successful, we have to deal with that fundamental first. And that fundamental first is disobedience itself. So if we haven't been able to abandon evil, if we haven't been able to become true warriors, if we haven't been able to fight our own passion, then of course we have not really achieved that ultimate status that is expected from us as Muslims. And part of the reason is rationale for saying this is because it believes that almost everyone can do good, okay? But it takes a higher person of understanding and intellect and fear of Allah to be able to refrain from disobedience. And that's the reason why he said the more important one is for you to refrain from disobedience in everything we do. Now, on obedience, we start with on the authority of one of the hadith of Prophet Islam, where Prophet Islam says on the authority of Abu Hurairah, where Prophet Islam said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, which is hadith you could see, whosoever shows enmity to someone devoted to me, I shall be at war with him. My servant draws not near to me with anything more loved by me than the religious duties I have enjoined upon him. And my servant continues to draw near to me with supererogatory works so that I shall love him. When I love him, I am his hearing with which he hears, his seeing with which he sees, his hand with which he strikes, and his foot with which he walks. Were he to ask something of me, I would surely give it to him. And were he to ask me for refuge, I would surely grant him it. I do not hesitate about anything as much as I hesitate about seizing the soul of my favorite servant. He hates death, and I hate hurting him. It was related by Al-Bukhari. Now I've highlighted the key red text which Imam and Ghazali focused on, which is in talking about obedience. It says the fundamental way you need to start from is that by drawing near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by performing those religious duties which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enjoined upon you. That is number one. Then you now move on to the next stage, which is you then draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by doing those things which essentially would classify as non-obligatory but considered supererogatory, which again helps to improve your status. Now, it is when you have now successfully improved that status, then you now begin to become one of the ones whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has now said that you become his hearing. Allah becomes your hearing with which you hear, your sight with which you see, your hand with which you strike, and your foot with which you walk. Okay, and up to the point where it becomes, that thing you call, the istijab of dua, whereby you ask for anything from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will surely give it to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would surely give it to you, or even give you something better than what you've actually asked for at that particular point in time. Okay. And again, and this is another very important point in this, and this is a difficult to see. Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I do not hesitate about anything as much as I hesitate about the soul of my faithful servant. He hates death, and I hate hurting him. So essentially, Allah is saying that if you get yourself to that status itself, okay, the only reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take such a servant away from this earth is when death is better for that person at that particular point in time. Okay. When death, it is only when death, if death is better for that person, that is the only reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take that person away from the surface of the earth. Now, on obedience, it goes, very deep. And again, obviously, I said at the beginning, we're only going to talk about obedience. We're not going to have enough time to talk about disobedience. I probably won't have enough time to even talk about, the companionship or actually the etiquette of attaining companionship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I suspect that probably is something that we can always talk about in the future. Now, on the topic of obedience, it starts with the etiquette of waking up. So essentially on obedience, is the whole description itself. Again, we need to remember that this is a set of instruction. It's given to someone who's come for advice. It starts, okay, from your morning, this is how your morning starts, okay? Etiquette of waking up from sleep. And it goes, I say, look, when you wake up from sleep, try to be awake before dawn. And let the first words in your heart and your tongue be the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, where you would say, Alhamdulillahi ladhi ayana ba'da mahtana wa ilayhi nushur. Okay, praise be to Allah who has brought us back to life after causing us to die. and to whom shall be our resurrection. Then he now goes on to talk about again another dua, which I think I find interesting again, because oftentimes we tend to read, I tend to read this after Fajr, but he, in his own recommendation to this particular student, they said also read Asbana wa Hasbal Mulkulillahi walhamdulillahi, and so on and so forth. So he is essentially saying that it shouldn't just be restricted to that dua. He said we should go ahead and say we have that dua again, which is we have entered the morning as the dominion belonging to Allah. Grandeur and might belong to Allah. Again, it goes ahead to talk about read more of the Asbana ala fitrat al-Islam wa ala kalimat al-Ikhlas wa ala dini nabiyina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala milati Ibrahim Anifa Musliman wa ma kana min al-mushrikeen. Again, reading that, also those famous words again, we have entered the morning upon the natural faith of submission, upon the word of sincerity in the religion of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the nation of our father Ibrahim, a poor monotheist, a pure monotheist, and one who submitted to Allah, who was not one of the idolaters. So quite a number of dua, which again he also recommended. And I think from the way I see it, I think reciting a few of those duas and having that clear intention that you want to wake up fresh is always a very good beginning. And this is one of the recommendations he's given. Now, on the etiquette of wudu, I don't want to delve too much into this, again, because of time. Again, essentially, which is one of the things I really find interesting about, his recommendation, because obviously when you wake up from sleep, the next thing, recommended for you using the toilet and, making wudu and performing your act of worship, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that he didn't see the act of performing your wudu as an automated action, which unfortunately it has become for many of us today now, where we just go in, perform that wudu, just wash those hands, wash your mouth, wash your face, hands, arm, head, and that's it, you're done, without any self-awareness of what you're doing, or without that connection with that act that you're performing at that particular point in time. So wudu itself, and I think, again, maybe I'm asking this in advance because I'm yet to come across, any key evidences backing some of the things he recommended. Well, the first one he recommended, which of course is very clear, is that you have to, be self-conscious of what you're actually doing, not just performing it just like that. But the other one, which again I've been trying to look for evidences for, I know I've read it in a number of books, but I'm yet to come across anyone which has given specific evidence from from the Quran, from a hadith or something. Is it says that when you wash your hand 3 times, okay, you should make it dua. So every act of wudu that you make, you actually make it dua. And this is what he recommended. And that's the point I'm saying. I'm yet to find actually specific narration connecting this. It says, after washing your hands 3 times, you say, "Oh my Lord, truly I beg of you good portents and blessing, and seek refuge in you from bad portents and loss." Okay, so that's the first thing he mentioned, that as one of the duas that you make when you wash your hand. And also he said that when you rinse your mouth as well, after rinsing your mouth 3 times, you make sure then you say, "Oh my Lord, help me with reading of your book, and much remembrance of you, and establish me in strength with the word that stands firm in the life of this world and in the hereafter." And this is actually a Quranic ayah as well, which is in Quran chapter 14, verse 27. Now, washing your mouth, washing your nose, I believe that's another, dua. You make another dua again, which is kind of like, make Allah make me smell the fragrance of paradise. Washing the arm, it says, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let me receive my my good deeds, my good deeds in my right hand, and so on and so forth. So many duas. And I think inshallah, hopefully, if any of us are aware of any narration or any quotation where this is mentioned, I think it should be much up, because I've seen it quite a number of times. And again, I think it's something that will be worth knowing a lot about, because quite frankly, it makes you more engaging when you're performing your wudu. Now, the time of prayer from sunrise. So again, so it talks about etiquette relating to the mosque. I'm not going to go into details about that. So you talk about you going to the mosque very early for those who can make it or who have to be in the mosque. Again, the etiquette of what you need to do when you're in the mosque, while you're waiting for salat, etiquette of what you need to do after the salat as well. Then it now goes on to talk about time for prayer, the time from prayer to sunrise. So he says that, look, after the salat, when you're waiting, after Fajr, when you're waiting for sun to rise, divide your acts of worship into 4. Okay, very easy. And again, this is one of the things I find very straightforward about his approach to things. 1, supplication. 2, dhikr. 3, recitation of the Quran. And 4, reflection. Now, oftentimes, for many of us, the first 2 could be taken care of by maybe reciting al-Masurat, the prayers of the morning and the evening. If you recite it, I believe that will take care of supplication and also of dhikr as well, because it's a combination of the 2 that we find in the al-Masurat, the dua for the morning and the evening. Recitation of the Quran, again, something which is recommended. And one of the scholars, one of the commentators of of his work did mention that, look, if only you can spend an average of maybe 5 minutes on each of these points every morning, 5 minutes on supplication, 5 minutes on dhikr, 5 minutes on recitation, and 5 minutes on reflection on your activity, that's about 20 minutes. Wallahi, you would find that sakina in your heart in approaching the day ahead of you. Now, there are days you will not be able to do every single one of them. But if we do make it a habit, and eventually you get used to it. And again, I'm going to give an example, which one of, somebody gave to me, and he said, look, because I was struggling to do certain things. One of the activities she's given to me to perform, she said, Ahmed, look, this is about your personal life. Okay. And actually, I was preparing for an exam. She said, look, Ahmed, this is about your personal life. Your work, your employer doesn't care whether you pass that exam or not. But ask yourself, will they miss you if you're not around for 15 minutes a day? They won't miss you. So kind of giving me an advice that, look, 15 minutes, if you spend 15 minutes just going over your own personal work, you would go a long way. By the end of the week, you'd have achieved a lot. Particularly with our busy lifestyle, it's very difficult to create a block of 1 hour. We always tell ourselves, we don't want to create 1 hour on the weekend, I'll do everything. But you discover that weekend is gone. Weekend is gone. Today now, we're all looking forward to the weekend. Now the weekend, weekend is really over right now. Now tell yourself, ask yourself, are you willing to achieve that? Again, some of us will tell ourselves that, oh, don't worry, maybe on Saturday morning, I'll create time to do my supplication. I'll create time to do my dhikr. I'll create time to do my recitation of the Quran and reflection and things like that. But in reality, oftentimes it's always difficult. And that is why that simple prescription of 5 minutes in the morning for each of these, that's just about 20 minutes, you would have succeeded in achieving some of this. And again, if you make it a habit as well, if for some reason you're not able to do, maybe you're only able to do supplication and dhikr in the morning, okay? Maybe later in the afternoon or later in the evening, you focus on reflection of the Quran or recitation of the Quran and also reflection as well. Now, on this point of reflection, you went a lot into it. Now, when you talked about reflection, it's not just talking about reflection and you just thinking. You are thinking of how you want to live the rest of your day. What are the things you've done wrong the previous day? What are the things you need to work on for this day that you're approaching as well? What are the things you need to focus on? How do you need to drive your activities for the day as well? And I think these are some of the key points which is emphasized. Now, from sunrise to midday goes ahead talking about earning a living and protecting your religion, good works, worship, and seeking useful knowledge as well. Again, I've reordered this. Actually, it started with seeking useful knowledge. That's number 1. Then went on to talk about worship, talked about good works, and talked about earning a living and protecting your religion as well. So I've reorganized it to start from the top. And again, because the reason I'm saying this is because for many of us, that is the way the world works for us right now. Particularly if you're not a student, if you're not someone who's studying, or you're working, as many of us probably are. Again, this is the way we'll probably approach it. This is the likely scenario for us in the sense that you want to earn a living. And it did mention that, look, you need to focus on this as well. And again, this is important because at times people tend to diminish the importance of this. That religion doesn't say you cannot go out, or you cannot come up with a sort of living. Again, on one hand, you want to focus on the thing, but at the same time, you want to focus on the means of sustenance as well. Good works. Now, what does it say about good works? It's very focused about good works in the sense that you need to engage in activities that support people around you. Okay, that support people around you. Things that people would see, people would look up to and say, look, this person is doing a good. Now, you're not doing it because of that, but you're actually doing it because that is part of the things that would make you the one of those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants success in this life and on the day of resurrection. Worship as well, again, focusing on your worship, and I think it talked a lot about that with the morning activities before Salat and during Salat and after Salat as well. And of course, finally seeking useful knowledge as well. Again, that was the beginning of this conversation as well. That yes, seeking knowledge, but again, it has to be useful knowledge. It has to be knowledge which benefits you. It shouldn't be knowledge that takes you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, in terms of religion, I think because I have just about 5 minutes left, I'll quickly go over the few remaining key points. Now, in terms of religion, and I think this is really important for us, and the reason why I say this is important for us is that at times we need to try to focus our minds on where we actually are. So in his own explanation, he said there are 3 categories, and again, it's very common in many of the ways he makes things simple for people. He tries to break it down. And again, I think there's a number of examples in the Quran as well, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would describe different category of people. Now, in this case, he said, look, category number 1, there is a safe one. Now, who would you classify as a safe one? Now, the safe one is essentially somebody who you could say, they just do the basic one. Okay, this is someone who suffices with doing the basic obligatory acts and does not commit sin. Okay, they do the obligatory acts and they do not commit sin. Now, number 2, it talks about the one who profits. The one who profits, this is one who voluntarily performs good deeds and voluntary acts of worship. And I think we know that. So first one is just purely obligation. Second one, the one who profits is the one who, apart from doing these obligatory acts, they also do the voluntary one. And finally, the loser. This is one who falls short in the performance of the obligatory acts. So taking it back to number 1. So anyone who falls short of doing the obligatory acts becomes a loser. Now, again, for us, many of us, it's difficult to actually say, well, which category do we actually belong? But what he did mention is that try not to be amongst the losers. If you cannot be the one who profits, then at least try to be the safe one. That is somebody who is performing the basic obligatory acts and ensuring that you are avoiding the sins, particularly the major sins, as much as possible. And I think that is the category which he said many people might belong to, but whatever you do, try not to be amongst the losers. Now, in his own classification, so he's classified this at 3 levels in terms of religion. Then he now goes ahead to make another classification again, but this time around in terms of your relationship with people. 3 levels in terms of your relationship with people. Now, the highest level, which he describes like noble angels towards people. That is, you behave towards people in a way that, this is by striving to help with their needs, out of kindness to them, and by bringing happiness to their heart. So you try to help people out, happiness, bring joy and happiness to them. The middle category is like that of an animal or an inanimate object, in which case you are no good to them, you are no good to them. and you don't harm them, but at the same time you are not of any value to them. So you're like an object sitting in the corner, not disturbing them, not giving them any good, or not even creating any harm for them. Now the 3rd category is like the scorpion or the serpent or the wild beast, in which case essentially there is no hope for good from such an individual. evil is feared of him. Whenever it comes in, people assume evil of him. Now, why is some of this category really important for us to kind of like grasp the concept? It is important because at every interaction that we have with people, we would belong to one of these categories. You would either be the lowest, in which case you're always fighting them or you're always attacking them for no good reason at all, or you belong to the person in the middle, in which case you are no value to them, they're just walking by, like somebody you meet in the shopping mall, you go by them and they go by you. No business done. And finally, you have the one who is the highest category, somebody who is always willing to help others and also acting towards people in the best manner possible. And I think this is discussed in a number of other sections of some of these other works as well. But again, I think for us, and this is one point that we need to focus on as best as we can to ensure that we are one of those who are actually striving towards the best personality that we can be. Now, sleep, finally, and this is the end now. So you've gone through all your days, everything that you need to do during the day. Now, finally, you need to go to bed. Okay, and quite interestingly, he did mention that you should make sure that you should not exceed for day or night should not exceed 8 hours. I think I put 24 hours there. It should not exceed 8 hours, which quite frankly, at times people do think that, oh, you need to sleep a lot less and things like that, to listen to some lectures. Some of those lectures is as if they tell you not to even go to sleep at all. And now, based on all the things he's described, and I was saying at the beginning that it's quite intense. Even with this level of intensity, he still says that, look, you can still afford to sleep 8 hours. Although it's a lot by standard, if you look at the 8 hours, is a lot. But quite frankly, if you have managed your time very well, in the best possible manner, the remaining set of hours, which I think is about 16 hours, you can still make something out of those 16 hours. Although it may not be full, it may not be a lot, but you can still make something tangible out of it. But he just said that you try not to exceed that 8 hours, whether a combination of the day and the night. If you sleep 2 hours in the night, in the day, perhaps maybe you need to sleep 6 hours in the night or something. So again, that's something that we need to look out for. And finally, preparation for sleep as well. Many of us just going to bed straight away without preparing for what comes after waking up. Okay, we need to be prepared for what comes after waking up. You don't just go to sleep and assume that's it. You need to prepare for what am I going to do in the morning. Many of us think of going to work in the morning, but we don't think of salat. We don't think of tahajjud. We don't think of some of those other important things. He says that, look, you need to prepare for those things. Up to the point where he says you need to get your water for ablution ready for when you wake up. You need to get your miswak ready. All those things, put them where they should be. Okay, in the same way you would get your school uniform ready for the following day, or get your work clothes ready for the following day, you get those things ready as well for when you wake up. Now, these days, we just open the tap and get water come out, and we just assume those. It says that you need to fully prepare for some of those things. And finally, dua for going to sleep. Again, we are aware of some of those duas. And the reason why, because of time, I don't want to read out, some of the duas, but I think we can always reference some of these dua. Now, we need to remember that when we go to sleep, sleep in itself is the brother of death. That's the nearest to death that we can think of. And, I think I'm going to end on some of these final notes. Again, in recent days, I think many of us might have heard of, people who have passed away, people, we may not know personally, but people we know by virtue of the work they've done in the community, in the Muslim community, whether locally or internationally. And some of those things were unexpected. Just happening suddenly like that. Now, it's good for us to kind of like think with this mindset, to learn from some of these things. Death is not always written on people's faces. You don't know who the next person is. Okay. As we're having this conversation, we don't know who the next person is. People reading the message, we don't know, even the scenes some of this death have happened. Some of the people who have read about the death of some of these individuals have even gone, have passed away since the beginning since being made aware of some of the death of these individuals. And again, it's always very important for us as Muslims to always remember that yes, death is there, and we all know it. It's not as if it's not a Muslim thing. That's something that is universal to everyone. whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, every single person is certainly going to have a taste of death. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. But the question is, what can you do to prepare yourself for it? And again, going to sleep as well is one way of preparing ourselves, in the sense that, when you do focus and look, yes, going to sleep, there's no guarantee that you're going to wake up. There's no guarantee that you're going to wake up. It helps us to have what I'll call a healthy relationship with death. Quite frankly, when I first read, when I first used to read that dua of going to bed, where we used to read, linking, sleeping with death and, taking our souls away and everything. At times I used to wonder why would there be death? But the reality is that we need to have a healthy relationship and be able to talk about death, because it's certain it's going to happen to every single one of us. I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the full understanding of all the things we've talked about today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive me. Apologies, I think I spent about 4 minutes beyond the time that I've been allocated. But again, it's one of those things where perhaps we seek Allah's protection, Allah's guidance from whatever mistakes that I might have made. And also as well, we pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a better understanding for those who have listened to it and even we have delivered it. Assalamu alaikum.